Hey everyone, I'm Kaziz Farnellis, the visiting scholar this year with Network Publics, our Annenberg Center for Communications annual research theme. Today we have Chris Anderson, who's the editor-in-chief of Wired magazine. He has been editor-in-chief of Wired since 2001. During this period, he has led the magazine to 4 National Magazine Award nominations, has won the prestigious Top Prize for General Excellence in 2005, a year in which I renewed my Wired subscription for 3 years, very optimistically. A year in which he was also named Editor of the Year by Ad Age magazine. Chris holds a Bachelor of Science degree in physics from George Washington University and studied quantum mechanics and science journalism at the University of California at Berkeley, and subsequently worked as a researcher at the Los Alamos National Laboratory's Mason physics facility and served as research assistant to the chief scientist of the Department of Transportation. And I think you're going to see throughout his presentation kind of evidence of the kind of polymath mind of Chris Anderson, his ability to work with everything from culture to economics to science to media, all manner of other things I haven't mentioned. His career in media began at the two most famous really academic science journals, Nature and Science, where he served in various editorial capacities. And then he went on to The Economist, where he started The Economist's internet coverage in 1994. Economist, of course, is noted for having a very sophisticated and impressive internet presence, and directed the initial web strategy for The Economist. Chris served as the U.S. business editor and Asia business editor based in Hong Kong, and technology editor for The Economist as well. He is also an officer of the Young Presidents Association and a regular speaker and a participant at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. Today he's going to be speaking to us about his forthcoming book, The Long Tail. On your chair you have some reprints from Wired magazine of Chris's very influential article on The Long Tail. Steve, come on up. Embarrassing, so you can read, if you haven't had a chance to look at that, you're welcome to take it with you. And also, this has been expanded on in a lengthy blog called thelongtail.com. All of these links are also at the NetPublics website, so you're welcome to go there and investigate further. The Long Tail is fascinating to us at Network Publics because of this question of how people are going to continue consuming both, or how people are going to consume media and products and the world and understand the world around them in this new network world that is and the Long Tail, I think, is really an incredible attempt to make sense of this and give this contemporary condition to us. So we're going to hear now Chris speak about it. I'm not going to introduce it anymore since he will do a great job of it. We just had a fantastic seminar with him, and I'm sure this will be great too. We're going to hear Chris talk about inches and as I was put it from push to nudge. This is the soundbite I wanted to give you.
Thank you. Unfortunately, it's just started my tape recorder to pick that up. Hi everybody, and thank you for coming out tonight. What I'd like to do today is sort of plow through a lot of slides and data and stuff and throw way too much at you in hopes that a little tiny bit will stick long enough to have a fun Q&A session. We've got a good bit of time here, and I'm really here to hear your questions, and to have a conversation. And the forced march to the PowerPoint is only hopefully to stimulate more of that. As mentioned, the article came out a year ago, and the book is due at the end of this year, which is completely freaking me out. And you're catching me in sort of, a guy who's got 6 weeks to go before his book is due. It's been a research project with, since the article came out, research project with Harvard, Stanford, and MIT, largely looking at the economics of the Long Tail, which I'll talk more about. And extraordinary amount of data. We have one computer just crunching data right now from companies like Netflix and iTunes and Amazon to try to make this as rigorous as possible and really characterize this phenomenon with not just PowerPoint, but So let me plow through and touch on some topics. Today I'm going to focus largely on the cultural effects of it, but I'm going to start with just some introduction about what the long tail is. And I'm assuming most of you have read the article, so I'm not going to do too much remedial stuff, but I want to frame it in a kind of historic context. So, the world that we've spent our last century, and at least certainly last half century, of a hit-driven economy, a hit-driven culture, is one that's largely driven not so much by cultural and social demands, but by economic demands that have to do with the costs of our distribution channels. And this is what I call a scarcity-driven marketplace, where shelf space is scarce and expensive, and inventory, holding is scarce and it's expensive, and so is spectrum for the broadcast, television and radio, the spectrum of a coax cable for cable TV. There are a limited number of channels. And the marketing of content is also expensive. So all these things basically are sort of bottlenecks. They're limited channels that require a very sort of that are very selective about what they let through. What they let through is hits. Hits have this virtue of being able to aggregate audiences, and when you have a limited number of channels, limited number of screen channels, limited number of screens, limited number of inches of shelf space, you have to be very selective about what you put on it. And typically, you pick these things called hits. Hits are good because they cut across many interests, and they're able to use that space efficiently. In other words, they pay the rent. And the other thing is that you market the hell out of these hits because you do a lot of advertising. As you know, half the Hollywood budgets are for marketing, because you hope this will catalyze some sort of organic word of mouth and, again, make better and better use of these scarce distribution resources. We're not really good at making hits, unfortunately. We would like to find great stuff out there, and we wish that our A&R guys and our studio executives were incredibly good at finding talent, but the reality is that it's hard to do and risky, and so we end up going to formulaic solutions. Stars, we pay stars a lot because they tend to aggregate audiences. We go for special effects and for genres that cut across interests, things like action films. And that's what we do because, again, we've got these expensive screens and distribution channels, and we need to make the best of them. And so you get culture as we know it today, which is this sort of one-size-fits-all products where we very quickly kill off things that don't kind of become hits. The kind of the eternally imperiled state of TV shows like Arrested Development, which are undeniably good and yet don't sort of pass the economic threshold for that distribution channel. And we limit choice to just the stuff that does pass above threshold. And it's quite Darwinian with a very, very, grim reaper out there, being the network executives and studio executives and the Hollywood executives. But things are changing. And basically, as you all know, over the last 10 years, we've got a new distribution method. The distribution method is broadly the internet, but it's the economics of digital distribution. And it is, again, will come no surprise to anyone that it has infinite shelf space and infinite channels and very low cost distribution of everything. And we kind of know on some level this is different, but we didn't really realize until we started pulling together the data over the last few years just how different this really is. So, needless to say, all the scarcity effects of the 20th century are becoming abundances in the 21st. We have infinite screens, infinite channels, infinite shelf space, infinite inventory, infinite holding capacity, infinite carrying capacity, digital infinite copying capacity. Bits are groovy in many dimensions. And what this means is that we don't need to just count on hits to fill the channel. We suddenly have an economic system that allows niches as well. One of my challenges in writing this book is to figure out how to pronounce niches. And I'm told that I take polls and half the audience says niche and half says niche. And I'm really, I don't know, what do you guys think? Is niche pretentious or not?
Depends on how niche-y you are.
Yeah.
Depends on how you pronounce it.
I had an old famous British architecture historian teach me, and he always said niches.
Niche. Yeah. Well,
Fortunately, you're writing a book.
I know. That's good. For podcasting purposes, really. So, what do niches mean? Well, let me take a moment here to sort of to pour through this slide, which is really an update of the kind of canonical chart you'll see in this reprint. This is music, and the data happens to come from Rhapsody, which is one of the music services. It could easily be iTunes or Napster or anybody else. The red part represents the inventory that Walmart has and that the online service has. Walmart carries about 4,200 CDs, which correlates to about 50,000 tracks. As you know, the online world is kind of a track world. So I've converted that. This is Walmart's inventory, and unsurprisingly, Walmart carries the hits. They carry the stuff that sells the most because their shelf space is very expensive and they need to make their use of it. However, every year there are 35,000 CDs released. Walmart carries 700 of them. So there's a huge amount of stuff that Walmart doesn't carry. And until recently, we assumed that if it wasn't on the shelf, the store shelf, it just kind of didn't exist. And now we're realizing that, of course, it does exist. What the long tail is all the stuff beyond that carried in traditional bricks and mortar retailer. So Walmart carries 50,000 tracks, and Rhapsody carries actually 1.2 million, probably about 1.5 million. iTunes is at 2 million. The peer-to-peer networks are tracking 8 to 12 million. There's probably something like 20 million tracks out there. Tiny, tiny fraction of it is carried in Walmart. Now, each of these titles in the long tail of music does not necessarily sell a lot. You can look at the scale here. These things are selling maybe 100 plays per month. But there are so many of them that in aggregate, the market represents, well, last year it was 23%, now it's 28%. It looks like it's at the end of the year, this year it'll be closer to 32%. It looks like over time it's going to be about 50%. So in other words, half the music industry is now stuff that Walmart doesn't sell. That's a very big deal. That suggests that two things. A, it suggests that there's a market for music that Walmart doesn't sell. And B, it suggests there's a cultural demand to now kind of a cultural resonance with stuff that is non-traditional. Indie once meant very underground, very niche, very obscure. Now indie is half the market. And that's a big shift, not just in terms of business, but also in terms of our cultural, the culture we're inheriting. So, to give you another sense, this is the music this is the way we've been buying music for the last a few decades, and that shelf represents this tiny, tiny, tiny red sliver there on the left. The traditional form of music is an almost infinitesimal fraction of the total music available. Tower Records is a specialist, so they have a little more inventory. iTunes carries I'm standing away the video. iTunes carries more, but iTunes only carries the stuff, the music that has had its rights cleared for digital distribution. And Amazon carries all the CDs ever made, whether they've been cleared for digital distribution or not, and that's even more. And if I could add another chart for the peer-to-peer networks, which would go another 4 million tracks. So tiny, tiny fraction. Likewise for DVDs. I mean, the traditional way we've seen DVDs is the kind of classic blockbuster shelf where you have 100 copies of the hit coming out this week against the back wall and everything else suppressed. This is the way we've looked at the DVD market, and yet once again, that the DVD market as we know it is this tiny sliver on the left. Netflix has more stuff, and Amazon has not just the DVDs but also the VHS tapes. It has basically can list every video ever made. There are of course many hundred thousands that have never been released commercially, and an infinite number still yet to be made. I want to play a little bit with this concept of what this is a power law. This is basically the shape of all markets. Now, we've talked a little bit about it. The hits. A few things sell a lot of things sell little. You get a rapid fall off from the hits, and down to the niches, and the niches go on forever. Well, there's another way to look at that, which is if you rank them, if you have the number of products in each decile of sales, you see an inverse power law, which is that the top 10%, maybe 250 titles represent the top 10% of sales. Then about 700 represent 10 to 20% of sales, and then so on. And then you realize that most of the stuff is way down here at the very bottom of the sales. So a small number of things up there represent most of the sales, and a large number of things represent the rest. If you rank it as a pyramid, it shows a pyramid, you see this, that in terms of just, again, not in terms of the sales, but the number of titles in each sale category, each revenue decile, you see that the stuff that Walmart has is this tiny bit at the top of the pyramid. And that most music isn't sold in Walmart. Now, the obvious metaphor, of course, is an iceberg, where the waterline represents the economic threshold. That waterline represents sort of the economics of Walmart shelf space. If something sells enough to pass that economic bar, it's offered on the shelf. If it does not sell enough to pass that economic bar, it's down here in the invisible water. And what you're seeing right now with all these long tail markets is basically instances where the economics of carrying something have been dramatically improved, which looks a little bit like this. Basically, the waterline falls, the cost of offering product becomes cheaper and cheaper, and as the waterline falls, more and more content is revealed. So that's another way of looking at the long tail. Now, what is the long tail made of? I mean, a lot of it is made of three things. There are sort of, there are the hits. I mean, the hits continue to sell. Then there's the sort of the commercial products that just didn't sell well enough to get into the television channel, onto the movie theater screen, onto the shelf space. And I'll give you lots of non-entertaining examples in a moment as well. So there's that, the commercial content that hadn't maximized its audience. And then there's this long tail of non-commercial content, sometimes made by amateurs, sometimes made for reasons that weren't about making money. It's sort of an infinite supply of other stuff out there. Now, the traditional industries, media and entertainment industries, are pretty skeptical about this peer production, amateur creative stuff. And Barry Diller is one of the most skeptical. And they sort of think they've got it right. They think they've got a great system for identifying talent. And they think they've probably found all the talent. Well, I want to show you a couple videos. I'll start with this video. My children, I have a bunch of little kids, and they came back from school the other day asking to see this movie that they heard about called The Codex. And I hadn't heard about it, so I checked the listings and it wasn't showing in any local theater. And then I checked on Netflix and it wasn't available on Netflix. I checked on Amazon, it wasn't available on Amazon, and then I Googled it. And I'd like to show you 2 minutes of my children's favorite film. I hope this comes up.
Noble warriors, for ages untold, our covenant has fought for this moment. On world after world, our forefathers fought to uncover the mysteries of the ancients, and now we stand on the brink of the great journey. But the humans would deny us our holy destiny. I ask you, not as a commander, but as a brother in arms, to fight.
Over the years, we've lived and died together. We've shared barracks, we've shared foxholes. We've shed tears and shed blood together.
But I would not have you remember all that we have done. I would have you remember why we have done it.
We were fighting for something more than ourselves.
For something more than our personal honor or glory.
showed you was Machinima. Machinima is a movie made by a video game. The video game happens to be Halo. These four 17-year-olds from Houston, Texas, made this movie. They made it for basically no cost. They distributed it for free. It has now been seen by more people, 13 million people, more people than the Dukes of Hazzard.
The Dukes of Hazzard film.
Film. Fair point. They won't be another codex because they all went to college and they scattered to the winds. These guys are, from my children's perspective, they are not interested in Disney. This is the stuff they're interested in. They don't distinguish between commercial and non-commercial content. They don't distinguish between stuff they see in a DVD and stuff that was downloaded over the internet and also seen on TV. It's all just one menu item versus another on their TV. They're entering a world where the channels of distribution are completely open, and it is a meritocracy where good content rises to the top and is passed around on the schoolyard by other kids who are into stuff, regardless of what Hollywood or the marketing engines or advertising or even professional reviewers have to say about it. This is a very different content and entertainment world than what we inherited, and I think it's just going to grow. I want to talk a little bit about what that Machinima video represents. In a sense, it represents the three forces of the long tail, the three things that create the long tail. The first is what I call the democratization of production. So that's Machinima. What you need to make a Machinima movie is an Xbox, a copy of Halo, a video capture card, and some video editing software. Basically, what every 17-year-old already has. Between a Mac and the game console they're already playing, they have the tools of production. So the entire manufacturing production apparatus of Hollywood basically exists in the basement of the 17-year-old's home. Likewise for music, likewise for print, likewise for many other forms of media. What that ends up doing is it ends up identifying talents that Barry Diller doesn't believe exists. These guys aren't on his radar, and yet they have created a movie which is popular, and they have basically populated the tail. And as more and more people start to do this tail is going to get longer and longer with stuff that's been created outside of the traditional, entertainment factory. The second thing that this demonstrates is the lowering cost of consumption. So how did that movie get out there? They put it on a website that got picked up on BitTorrent and is distributed for free. So again, they don't control the access to the theaters. They don't have any. The distribution network of traditional movies doesn't know anything about them, but they don't care. They have the internet. They put it on their website. BitTorrent took over. Pow! It's accessible. But not until people find it. And how do they find it? Well, God knows. My kids heard about it on the playground from one of their friends and saw it at a friend's house. How did the friend hear about it? I don't know. I think he had an older brother, and I think the older brother read about it on some discussion site about Halo. He was into Halo as are millions and millions of other people. And if you're into Halo, you go online, you read about Halo, you read the Halo blogs, you read the Halo discussion sites, and you hear about this thing. If you're into Halo, you're really into Halo, and you have this infinite appetite for more stuff. So basically, a marketing force that doesn't have anything to do with advertising and didn't cost any money had the effect of taking our kids from the world of Disney to the world of the Codex with the same ultimate outcome as marketing, but at no cost. They drove demand from the head down to the tail, simply again the amplified word of mouth of the internet. I use entertainment examples because that's what the data sets are rich. So basically had 10 years of Amazon's and Netflix and MP3, etc. And so the data sets are quite rich, and we're also past the early adopter artifacts. Where, in music in particular, what we're looking at right now is not sort of what the geeks are doing, but basically what an entire generation is doing. And so we feel pretty confident that the data we're seeing out there reflects the organic shape of demand rather than just a kind of a pent-up demand from people who have been deprived of it due to the existing retail models. But it's not just entertainment. Obviously, you can think of blogs as being the long tail of media. You can think of eBay as being the long tail of physical goods and of merchants and of sellers. Google is not just the long tail of advertising, but also the long tail of ad-driven publications. Anybody can, can buy an ad on Google for 5 cents. Most of Google advertisers are not traditional advertisers who've never advertised before. And most of the people who are running Google ads are not traditional ad-driven publications who don't have an ad sales force. You can think of open source as the long tail of talents, you can think of globalization as the long tail of labor, and even to kind of push it really far, you can think of insurgency in Iraq as the long tail of warfare. Thanks to the democratization of the tools of warfare, sadly. So this model seems to be quite broad, and anytime you see this kind of lowering of the costs of entry, be it the democratization of the tools, or just things like digital economics, you end up seeing this much longer tail of participants in the market. Actually, I may actually skip over this one. So how do we find stuff out there? So I talk a lot on my blog, and I'll talk a bit in the book about the notion of filters. And filters are, Google's a filter, recommendation engines on Amazon. If you like X, you'll like Y. People like you like this. A blog can be a filter. What filters are, they're ways to sort of find the stuff that's right for you out there in that huge mess of the tail and bring it to your attention. They have the effect of marketing. And I want to talk a little bit about the kind of the errors that we make, the presumptions we make about markets because we're stuck in hit-driven thinking. One of the presumptions is that the stuff at the tail is worse than the stuff at the head. I mean, that makes sense. If it was good, it would sell well, right? Well, otherwise put it, the long tail is full of crap. It is true that there's a lot of crap in the long tail, but it's not true that all the stuff in the long tail is crap. What you find is that the stuff at the top is stuff that appeals to broad interests. It's stuff that kind of cuts across many interests. It's sort of the one-size-fits-all, lowest common denominator stuff. And the stuff in the tail tends to be a very narrow interest. What people don't realize is that stuff of narrow interest may be often more satisfying than stuff of broad interest. If you're into Greek, ancient Greek history, you may find that the best book of ancient Greek history is way down here in the tail. It's a very narrow interest. But it is the best book in ancient Greek history, and it's not going to be in the New York Times bestseller list. Likewise, the worst book on ancient Greek history is probably also down here in the tail, and you need some way to distinguish between them. So what you find is not that quality declines down the tail, but that the dynamic range of quality expands. You get, yes, stuff gets worse as you go down the tail, because it hasn't been sort of gone through the rigors of the commercial screen, but also things get better as they become more narrowly focused and sort of targeted to a very specific niche. And so what you have with greater dynamic range is you have a need for more and more powerful filters to find that stuff and bring them to your attention. And Google is an example of a more powerful filter than Alta Vista and the search engines that came before it. And right now we're in sort of the second generation of recommendations on the music services in Amazon, which are more powerful filters than what came before, but we have so much further to go. In the way I express it in information theory terms, the signal-to-noise ratio gets worse as you go down the tail, and as a result, to maintain a constant level of kind of relevance to you, those filters need to get stronger and stronger. We can talk more about that in questions if you'd like. We've had filters in the past, but the filters in the old days were what I call pre-filters. I'm an example of a pre-filter. I edit a magazine. What that means is that I try to sort of guess at what my readers want. I try to get a sense of what's out there. I try to identify the talent ahead of time. I try to guess what the readers want. And I try to kind of package it all together, commission the stories, edit them, get the photographs in a way that I think my readers are going to like. Likewise, the A&R guys, or the talent scouts in the record industry, try to identify the talent they think are going to be popular and elevate them. The studio execs do the same thing with film. And in department stores, you have buyers who try to guess at what people are going to like and then fill the shelves with that stuff. In the markets of the codecs and the long tail markets, what happens is that everything gets out there and then the marketplace sorts it out. So you have this kind of wisdom of crowds meritocracy, where no one decided whether codecs was going to be popular or not. It just became popular. So, I try to guess at what people are going to want, and I put my stories out there, but ultimately the readers decide what they like. And so, some stories will get a zillion links and become very popular, and other stories will fall completely flat. Sometimes I guess right, sometimes I guess wrong. Ultimately, the marketplace decides. The thing about blogs is that blogs don't have editors. They don't have pre-filters. Everything gets out there already. And you're seeing more and more markets where it all just gets thrown out there. The peer-to-peer services are just, and Amazon's and iTunes are cases where all the music gets out there, and the recommendations and popularity, sort of kicks in afterwards. Word of mouth is an example. Sort of, the organic decision, the organic judgment of the marketplace is measured after the fact, not before. And likewise, the buyers with a capital B may decide what goes on the shelf, but ultimately the buyers with a small b decide what's going to truly be popular. And so this notion of kind of post-filtering is one where you sort of say, stop trying to guess at what people want. Get it all out there, and then measure what people want, and find ways to encourage that. The result is that you see this big power shift between sort of the owners of the tools of production, and to regular consumers. And what this means is that it's just basically a shift from hits to niches. It's not the end of hits by any means, but it's a kind of a rebalancing, where you have a kind of the two of them on equal footing. And just in the same way that my children have Disney videos and the codex is just one menu item or another on their relatively fancy video, media center system at home. But that's also the TiVo world. It's largely the world we're going to be inheriting, where the most powerful and the least powerful are sort of able to kind of fight it out based on the merit alone. And you have now the ability to have bottoms-up, grassroots production, not just the stuff that kind of comes out from the top, the traditional industries. The audience is incredibly scattered and fragmented. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. So ultimately, this is what it means. Infinite choice equals ultimate fragmentation. What the long tail is infinite choice. It means that you're no longer limiting choice because of the scarcity of distribution. You have you have abundant, cheap distribution. That means abundant, cheap, and unlimited choice. And that means that the audience will sort of distribute along with the choice. And there's going to be no single place they all go. I want to talk a little bit, sorry about this ugly slide. I want to talk a little bit about the evidence we have. Things are changing. Mainstream media has basically never had it worse. Here's just some statistics. Just earlier this week, the latest newspaper statistics came out, and it just gets uglier and uglier with newspapers. Box office, as you know, is having a tough time, but so are DVDs, which are slowing, as I'll get to in a minute. Music sales are way down. Digital's up, but it's still a small fraction of the market, possibly because people are choosing to still go to peer-to-peer services rather than pay for it. Radio, one rock radio station a week is going out of business, changing to talk radio or Latino radio. And the same reason that MTV has stopped playing music, radio is basically, the market for music on radio just doesn't exist anymore. Again, because they can't find a playlist that can aggregate audiences. Music is polarizing. And they cannot find any playlist that can keep people stuck on one station long enough for the to satisfy the advertisers. MTV switched to reality TV because it's sticky. Radio switches to talk radio because it's sticky. It's the only way to keep audiences within that broadcast system. And even books are down. These are some of the mixed pictures. DVD growth, which was basically kept Hollywood from dealing with the perils of the music industry, is slowing. This is DVD sales. DVD rental is Blockbuster's in bankruptcy. Actually, are they in bankruptcy? Maybe out of bankruptcy now. Anyway, Blockbuster is struggling. TV, you're seeing viewership rise as we have more and more TVs in the home, but the ratings of the individual shows are declining. I'll show you a chart of that in a second. Magazines in my business, it's flat, basically flat. Newsstand sales are down dramatically, but the business as a whole is flat. And video games, at the moment happen to be down simply because we're at the end of a platform cycle. I think they'll pick up again. And finally, the only really strong positive picture is internet advertising. And internet advertising has the great thing about Amazon is that it is basically it is the economic engine for the long tail. All those ads are running on all those little blogs. Internet advertising is a model that scales to the pure production system very efficiently, and so it's interesting that that's up. I mentioned the fragmentation in TV in particular. This is as there are more and more channels and more content, the audience is distributing naturally around it. And this is sort of a little bit of a precursor. This shift from broadcast television over the air to cable television to digital cable television, from 3 to 5 to 60 to 100 to 400 channels, is a little bit of a glimpse of a long tail at work. And what happened is that the individual shows, the ratings get less and less. It's amazing that in the late 1950s, 70% of Americans were watching I Love Lucy. this was sort of the peak of the water cooler era, where you could come into work and pretty much assume that everyone in your office had watched the same show at the same time last night. It was a moment of kind of ultimate cultural lockstep, where we all did the same thing at the same time. But over time, that declined until now. The top-rated shows wouldn't have made the top 10 just 30 years ago. And we're still watching television, but we're watching different things. And not only that, but even if we're watching the same show, we're probably watching at different times. What with DVRs and increasingly video on demand and so on. You can't talk about the show, in front of the water cooler, because even if someone else watches it, they may not have seen it yet, and you'd be ruining the ending for them. So this kind of, we're breaking the cultural lockstep. We no longer assume that everyone's doing the same things we are. And where are they going? Everywhere. They're just scattering, to a zillion different things. To the internet, the classic, the lost boys, the 18 to 34 male, who is sort of, watching less and less television. Where are they going? I mean, they'd love to have a single answer. Oh, they're going to video games. Well, yes, and they're going to the internet. Well, where on the internet? Well, no single site. I mean, they're just scattering. And this is a real challenge to the existing, media and entertainment models. I wanted to give you a sense of the Instapundit, a right-wing and a left-wing blogger. Instapundit being a guy named Glenn Reynolds, who's a University of Tennessee law professor who just blogs by himself, who is more popular than the LA Times. That is just one of these freaky things that it's going to take us decades to understand. How Glenn Reynolds, who, by the way, actually has a full-time job. Glenn Reynolds, who blogs in his pajamas part-time, is more popular than LA Times on the internet. And so on, all the way down the line. Glenn Reynolds, by the way, doesn't even take advertising. It's completely non-commercial. It's total peer production. Craigslist is destroying the newspaper business for free. They don't charge for most of their listings. And the creation is peer production. It's being made by the community, for the community. It is a kind of a classic, from a newspaper perspective, it's a classic value destruction deal. It's not like the money is shifting from one person to another. It's just vaporized. It's gone. And this is the world that we're entering as the long tail expands. What I'm trying to say here is that broadly, this world where we only look to hits, that are only driven by kind of commercial consideration and traditional media and entertainment, is now having to kind of compete with this world of other stuff. Some of this stuff was kind of commercial content that had to maximize the audience, and some of the stuff is just pure production stuff that just people like our Kodak 17-year-olds made, and it's one continuum. They're all sort of fighting it out there in that Darwinian struggle. The incentives differ as well. Hollywood films are made to make money. They're profit-making entities. Down here in the middle, sometimes people don't care about money. They're just doing it for reputational purposes. Most people write books not to get rich writing books, but because they want tenure, or they want to get consulting gigs, or they want speaking fees, or they just want to be read. And down here, expression. Why do most people blog? Do they have an incentive? They have something to say. And the fact is, because they all have access to the tools of production, they all can do it. So these people right now who are motivated by expression are competing with the people who are motivated by the bottom line. And that's difficult for people who are motivated by the bottom line. You have the pros competing with the amateurs. You have the people who are trying very hard to protect copyright, to the people who really don't care about copyright, to the people who are actively trying to give their stuff away. This is the Creative Commons license shape. And so ultimately, you've got this case where the world of economics and sort of commercial consideration is now kind of all mixed up in a world of psychology and sociology, where people are kind of creating stuff that only could be created by commercial entities. Now they're creating for reasons that have nothing to do with economics. They have to do with, again, things like expression. And most of the bands on MySpace are giving away their music. Why are they doing that? Because they want audiences to show up to their live shows. It's really fun to play a band, playing a band. That doesn't need any explanation. Simply getting people to come to the live show is enough. And giving away music is the way they do that. How does this square with the existing music industry? We just haven't figured it out yet. I want to talk a little bit about some of the other fallacies we make. I talk about the tail of music, or the head of the tail, the curve of music, and act like it's one big one big thing, but it isn't. You know, the curve is made up of lots of different kinds of music. And you know, this actually happens to be the actual data. The first one is rap, the second one's indie, and electronica, and so on. And another way of looking at it is that the tail is made up of lots of little tiny tails. This is just, and what I've done is I've taken the average rank of each one of these genres, this is just the A's, and plotted the average rank of that genre. So, for example, here under alt-Christian punk, it turns out that if you average all the music is under alt-Christian punk, their rank is about here, which interestingly is ahead of acid rock and a couple other things. And then if you come down here to Afro-Cuban jazz, the average rank is this, but within this average rank is its own little tail. And what you have now is you realize that the actual long tail culture is not the big world of music, but instead, you know, it's this micro culture. This is the top 10 of Afro-Cuban jazz. If you're into Afro-Cuban jazz, this is the world you care about. This is your universe. And you have Tito Puente and a bunch of other people who you probably haven't heard of and certainly are not on the Billboard Top 100 or Top 1000. They're just not visible. Often, most of them not even carried on the Walmart shelf. But if you're into this music, these are the hits. These are the stars that you care about. And you know, you kind of ignore the broader tale and focus right in on this sort of this micro tale, the micro culture. And the recommendation engines work equally well right at that level. So broadly, what we're seeing is it's going to take generations to really wrap our heads around this. But we've been thinking about markets and culture in terms through the lens of hits. For 100 years, we've been looking at it. We've assumed that hits define culture, hits define the business of culture, and that's the way we think about it. We kind of ignore everything else. And now we don't have to ignore everything else. And we see that there's fallacies we've been falling into. We've assumed that the only hits matter and you can ignore the rest. We've assumed the economics of the hits were the economics of the entire market. That's not true. We've assumed that you could just focus on the big numbers and ignore the small numbers. But there are so many of those little small numbers that in aggregate, they're now sort of a force that rivals the big numbers, and you can't ignore it. And finally, we've assumed that you can push out messages, you can push out advertising, and that people would respond. And now what you're realizing is that word of mouth is happening on a level that advertising doesn't really work on. That's just to go back. You know, there's no advertising that's accompanied by any of this, and yet somehow this top 10 list emerged on its own based on what people actually like. This top 10 list is a marketing vehicle. This is driving demand to these, but at no cost to the artists or their labels. And so it's the end. It's not sort of the end of hits. It is the end of the tyranny of hits. It's the end of the monopoly of hits on the market. So you have the head and the tail, and the hits and the niches, and the institutions and the individuals, and the professionals and the amateurs. And that is really, I think, going to be the story of the next century. So big picture, you know, it's the end of one size fits all. It's, you know, many sizes, one size fits one. And it's all about specialization as we sort of fine slice the audience into narrow and narrow niches of their specific interests and get the right stuff to the right people. It's all about the peers. It's all about people trusting individuals, trusting other consumers. So let's say the ants have megaphones. This is a terrifying thing for the marketers out there. You can't control the conversation. It has to influence it. And finally, you know, they're talking about products. You know, what are they saying? How do you measure that? And what I'd like to do is finally end up by showing you a video made by somebody else. And forgive me for a second while I do a switch out. This I think will make that final point better than I can.
No one would have believed in the closing years of the 20th century that our most popular media were being watched in a way force that was quite a strength. No one in a new way by a force that was quietly gathering strength. With blind confidence, we consider them our own, our audience, our subscribers, our cuddly couch potatoes. With infinite complacency, we blithely segmented and sold them to advertisers. We learned to shape their habits, mold their desires, and give them the illusion of infinite choice. Yet from their side of the screen, with envious eyes, they studied us. And bit by bit, they learned, and linked, and drew their plans against us. Wielding weapons we ourselves provided. And then, early in the 21st century, came the great unraveling. We offered free choice, but all they heard was free. We devised more powerful, more complete, more feature-rich software, but they preferred to grow their own. They pounced, and they blocked, and they blew the house down. The world we knew was forever disintermediated, whatever that means. They have tasted power, and there are a lot more of them than there are of us. High inside our glass towers, our greatest minds prepare to respond.
Well, can't we just start blogging back at them?
Well, yeah, but where's the money in that?
On that note, thank you, and I'll take some questions.